For Assignment 3, which is a critical review of articles concerning topics in chapters 5 and 6, to start in chapter 5, the topic I'm most interested in this chapter is fetal stimulation from outside of the womb. Bornstein and Lamb state that noises are audible inside the womb during pregnancy, especially in the later terms of pregnancy, due to less amniotic fluid in the womb to buffer sound. The article I will discuss regarding fetal stimulation from outside of the womb is Sleep Little Baby, the calming effects of prenatal speech exposure on newborns' sleep and heart rate. The study conducted by the authors in the article included daily stimulation of 34 fetuses with a nursery rhyme spoken in a maternal voice. The stimulation began at 34 weeks gestation and was recurring until birth, and then again at weeks 2 and 5 after birth. After birth, the children were exposed to the original nursery rhyme as well as a new one, both with maternal and unfamiliar voices. To continue, the study sought to measure outcomes related to a calming effect from the nursery rhyme, as evidenced by deep sleep time, heart rates, and how many times the infant woke up during sleep. The outcome was measured by comparing the infants that were exposed to the maternal voice nursery rhymes to infants that were not, which were called naive infants, or the naive group. The evidence came from periods where the infants were exposed to both familiar and unfamiliar voice stimulation. After the study, the results concluded by showing infants that received nursery rhymes in a maternal voice while in the womb and after birth demonstrated less wake-ups, longer periods of deep sleep, and a lower heart rate as compared to the stimulation naive group. The article states that the evidence provided by the study points to a basic level of fetal learning and demonstrates a familiarity with auditory stimulation while inside the womb and directly after birth. These findings are consistent with Bornstein and Lamb's text stating that all senses come online prior to birth. 2 questions from the article. Given that the prenatal auditory stimulation was in the form of a nursery rhyme, would the same effects be reached if the auditory stimulation came in another form, such as conversation? And a second question, due to the inclusion of heart rate in the results of the study, does stimulation affect other vital signs or health aspects, such as cognitive function maybe? Another perspective, I believe the article could be improved by expanding upon the stimulation used in the test and by default expanding upon the result and conclusions of the modified test. It is given information from the results of the study that common conversation from the mother is not enough auditory stimulation to produce a calming effect on the child. However, how do we know that's the case? The article tested nursery rhymes, but the fetus hears their mother's voice daily. I would like for the study to have tested infant exposure to normal conversation, both in the maternal and unfamiliar voice, to see if the same results were seen. Also, due to the result of lowering heart rate when exposed to the familiar voice nursery rhyme, I would like to see the study include other health and function metrics. If vocal stimulation produces basic fetal learning and in return produces a lower heart rate when exposed to stimulation after birth, what other effects could the stimulation have? It would be beneficial to study fetal and infant health and well-being when exposed to auditory stimulation, and in this case, it was a nursery rhyme. It'd be interesting to see if cognitive function improves as compared to naive groups or other metrics such as anxiety and attachment style. For Chapter 6, the topic I was most interested in was conditioned learning in perception. Perception is the foundation of knowledge and understanding. Individuals would not experience things without perception, therefore foundational knowledge would be absent. Perception is the beginning of understanding of how to deal with emotions, how to manage relationships, and most all other things related to development, according to Bornstein and Lamb. The authors of our textbook state that how well individuals perceive things is always in question, and testing perception is theoretically and practically important to examine early brain development. One test I found interesting in Chapter 6 is the conditioned head turn test. Babies cannot communicate how they perceive things or what discriminations they can make between perceptions. So the conditioned head turn test is going to isolate what babies can and cannot perceive. Um, to continue, the article I explored regarding the conditioned head turn test in Chapter 6 is the conditioned head turn procedure as a method for testing infant speech perception. The article explains the use and implementation of the head turn test as a mean for testing infant speech and sound recognition. The article describes the use of the procedure by explaining that an infant is taught to turn their head to sounds and changes in sounds by being rewarded for doing so. The infant sits in the lap of the caregiver across the table from the experimenter. The experimenter and caregiver both cover their ears with headphones, which are having music played through them, so they do not give the infant any kind of visual or mobile, like motion cues for the infant to turn their head. The experimenter keeps the infant's attention with a toy or a shiny object, something for the infant to keep their attention focused on the experimenter. And while the infant has their attention focused on the experimenter, sounds are played from a speaker to the side of the room, mostly to the left. And the infant, in return, turns their head towards the sound. And when the infant correctly turns their head towards sound stimulation or changes in sound stimulation, the box containing the speaker lights up, showing an animal, some toys, something the infant finds rewarding. Therefore, they know they're being conditioned to turn their head when they perceive a change in sound. This method has been used to test speech discrimination, such as vowels and consonant syllables, sound frequencies, different voices, and phonetic differences in non-native speech, so different languages. Therefore, infants have demonstrated an ability to perceive differences in spoken voices, syllables, and frequencies. Infants have also shown an ability to detect phonetic differences in non-native languages that adults cannot perceive, demonstrating that infants enter the world language neutral, and as they grow older, they become specialists in their native language, and lose the ability to perceive those minute changes in sounds of different non-native languages. And they're often specialists by the end of the first year of life. 2 questions regarding the article in Chapter 6. If the infants at an early age, such as before the end of the first year, can perceive auditory language differences that adults and older babies can't, can the test be used to determine if infants perceive other stimulations that adults and other children can't? Another question, if infants are born language neutral, as the article suggests, if they are exposed to multiple languages in tandem in early infancy, such as, say, English and Spanish, will the languages both be spoken and comprehended as a singular native language would be, as infants specializes in their languages as they grow older? Another perspective, since the conditioned head turn test can determine if infants younger than 1 year can detect auditory differences that older adults and older individuals can't perceive, it gives rise to the possibility that the infants can perceive other things that older adults can't. The article could be improved upon by exploring other avenues of perception, such as sight, and the infant's ability to perceive these differences in sight. And it's not limited to sight, such as sound and touch and taste and other perceptions and senses. Although sight is not an aspect of perception that is specialized, such as learning a native language, it would be interesting to determine the extent to which infants recognize familiar and unfamiliar sights. The test could be modified to make these determinations and examine other phenomena, including familiar and unfamiliar touch, such as their caregiver's face. We know babies like to touch their dad's beard or their mom's hair, their mom's nose, their dad's face. If the infants are intimately aware of sight, sound, touch, and smell of their caregiver, the test may reveal the key characteristics of the infant's perception of the caregiver and perception of other phenomena in the world around them. Another one, the article could also be improved upon by exploring the nature of dual languages in the infant's perception. The article states that infants are born language neutral, as mentioned, that they can detect and perceive lingual differences that older adults that are specialized in their language after the first year can't perceive. The reality of a bilingual society which we live in today demonstrates a benefit to being proficient in multiple languages, especially English and Spanish if you live in the Southeast. Therefore, if an infant is systematically exposed to two languages, such as English and Spanish, would the infant be proficient in both languages as they would their native language? As they become specialized in a language as they grow older, would they be specialized in both, or would they just be specialized in one with a limited perception of the other language, or maybe a basic understanding of the other language, or maybe they're proficient in the other language? The article will be substantially more valuable to me, in my opinion, if the route of bilingual exposure was explored. Parents could benefit their children immensely in infancy by exposing them to a second language. The article could provide the research necessary to justify the effort to expose younger children and infants to multiple languages if the exposure was explored in this article. And to conclude, I have a reference page from Bornstein and Lamb Developmental Science and Advanced Textbook, which is our class textbook. I have an article from Lang Shabbos, Sleep Little Baby, article from Worker, Polka, and Peg, which is the conditioned head turn procedure. I hope you enjoyed this presentation.